Oh, hey, how you doing? I was just out here on my patio reminiscing about a dream that I had about 12 months ago. Kind of a crazy dream, to be honest, but anyway, welcome. While you're here, let me go ahead and give you a bit of a tour of my patio. First of all, just take a look at that thing. I built that from paver to base, the sand mix, all me. One whole summer it took me to build that thing. Now listen, compared to all of the other patios in the neighborhood, this is hands down the best looking patio around. That guy over there, concrete slab. Guy over there, pavers, they're all up and down, they're all uneven. This is the best fire pit. Everybody else has one of those cheap things that you buy at the store, you know what I mean? That thing's hand built. Hey, come on, let me give you a bit more of a tour of this thing. It is awesome. Come on out. First of all, look at these pavers. Unbelievable, right? Perfect symmetry. You want to talk about symmetry? Look at that fire pit. A perfect square. Now listen, I know we only have 4 chairs around it right now, but we can get up to like 12 people around that thing, because you know what that wall does? Provides additional seating. How ingenious was that, right? It's not just the wall, it's additional seating. Smart thinking. Take a look at them pillars. One over here, one over there. Perfectly blocks off the wall. The wall can be used for entertainment, and it can also be used for defense, right? Keep the neighborhood kids out whenever I don't want them. How you liking it, huh? It's pretty sweet, isn't it? Hey, let me tell you about these lights. Come on over a little bit. Take a look at this. These lights, solar panel. Genius. Never had to run an electric line. Don't have to pay extra on the electric bill, right? These things absorb the sun's rays all day, and then at sunset, boom, both lights instantly. Awesome, right? We got the fire pit. If you don't want to do the natural fire, guess what else we have over here? The grill, the best grill in the neighborhood, I'll have you know. An additional feature, check it out. You ready? Look at this, look at this. Side burner. You think my neighbor has that? No. You think that guy has it? No. You think that guy over there has it? Nope. Best grill, best fire pit, best patio. How awesome is that? Oh, and guess what? All of this built by me. Daniel chapter 4, lecture 3. In this lecture, we're going to be focusing specifically on verses 28 through 37. That's going to take us through the end of the chapter. This section of the chapter is typically known as the fulfillment of the dream. So you know how in the previous video there, I was bragging about my patio and just kind of showing off a little bit and talking about, you know, how good the lights were and the wall and the fire pit and all that kind of thing. Well, what I was trying to do was set you up for the beginning of this section. You see, that's exactly what Nebuchadnezzar is doing as he looks out over his land of Babylon. In verse 28, we read, "All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, 'Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?'" One of the things that we can notice in that section there is that Nebuchadnezzar is speaking in the third person. I don't know if you've ever heard somebody speak in third person, but it's kind of a reflection of arrogance or pride. And if you remember, this chapter is all about pride and humility and restoration. You see, let's not forget, God will humble the proud. And as we see in this section, one of the ways that Nebuchadnezzar is humbled is by going through his 7-year wilderness rock bottom moment. "7 years. That's how long the messenger said that Nebuchadnezzar would be in this state. He went from the king of Babylon to this, living in the fields, long hair, long beard, long claws, acting like an animal, living with the animal, eating like an animal. And why? All because he couldn't get over his own pride. Remember how Daniel tried to forewarn him of this situation? Hey, get your act together, get your heart right before God, and this won't have to happen. This is the interpretation of the dream. This is the living out of the dream. The tree has been cut down. This is what it looks like. The stump remains though. There's still an opportunity for restoration. If Nebuchadnezzar gets his heart right before God, he will be restored back to his rightful place as king of Babylon. However, for 7 years, this is what happens to Nebuchadnezzar. This is his rock bottom moment. Listen, he has a mental breakdown in a way that we haven't seen before. He goes crazy. He's out in the wilderness. Sometimes we have a hard time interpreting these passages of scripture. We have a hard time acknowledging the truth of this section of scripture. And yet, in our culture, we have a pretty significant infatuation with werewolves. Every Halloween, werewolf costumes. Back in the 1980s, Thriller by Michael Jackson, one of the all-time greatest music videos of all time. What's it all about? Werewolves. The Twilight trilogy of the mid-2000s, all about werewolves. We have this infatuation, and yet for some people it's not an infatuation, it's an all-out illness. It's a mental illness, a desire to be outside of yourself. Listen, Nebuchadnezzar didn't have that desire. However, he also didn't have the desire to humble himself before God. Listen, the theme of this chapter is pride and how God humbles the proud. I don't know if you've had a moment where God has had to humble you. I don't know if you've had to experience what it means to lose your pride and humble yourself before God. At the end of this chapter, Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges that God is who he is. This is the culmination of Nebuchadnezzar's spiritual journey. At the end of this chapter, Nebuchadnezzar knows God on a personal level. He acknowledges Daniel's God. Over the course of time, we've had this ongoing relationship between Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, and here now, through humiliation, Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges that there is one more powerful than him, and that is the hope of restoration. Listen, guys, I don't know if you've had a rock bottom moment. I don't know if you've had a situation in life where you feel like you can't get out of the pit, but you can. There is hope. There is an opportunity for restoration. When we put God before ourselves, he lifts us back up again. We've got to acknowledge that he is greater than us. When Nebuchadnezzar was able to do that, that is when the process of restoration came to fruition. So it's been 7 years and Nebuchadnezzar has been out in the wilderness. He's had his rock bottom moment. He's lost everything. He's been humbled beyond humility. And then there's an opportunity for restoration. You see, at the end of the chapter, we pick it up in verse 34. It says, "At the end of that time, the 7 years, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever." That's the same God that Daniel has been trying to get Nebuchadnezzar to believe in the whole time. Did you notice how in verse 34, Nebuchadnezzar goes back to the first person? Again, a bit more of a sign of humility. And then there's this restoration phase. If you read verses 35 and 36 and 37, Nebuchadnezzar gets restored back to his rightful place as king of Babylon. However, at the end, in verse 37, it says, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble." Listen, I don't know if you've had these experiences in life. I know I have. I know other people who have had. But there are going to be times when you are allowed, you are given grace to be restored if you pursue a life of humility. If you continue to live in pride, eventually you will fall. And sometimes we think we don't need to be humble. We don't think we've got any problems. We don't think we've got any issues, right? Sometimes this is a heart condition. This is a heart condition that Nebuchadnezzar was fighting for almost his whole life. And here at the end of his life, we see him come to an acknowledgement of God as God. The restoration, the hope that is provided by God's grace. God will humble the proud. It's a pretty impressive chapter when you think about just how long we have gotten to know Daniel and his relationship with Nebuchadnezzar. This is the last time we see Nebuchadnezzar, and it's pretty encouraging to know that it's never too late to turn your heart towards God and away from your own selfish pursuits.